Then I would like to officially call to order the Tuesday, February 16th, 2021 meeting of the Bolton Conservation Commission, and pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, subsection 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place. This public meeting of the Conservation Commission is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but the public can access this meeting while in progress by Zoom video communications. Members of the public attending this meeting virtually will be allowed to make comments if they wish to do so during the portion of the hearing designated for public comments by telephone, cell phone, or personal computer using Zoom. And as always, we will begin this evening with the roll call. I am Brian Barabee.
I am Jeff Bryan.
Emily Winter.
Bill Payne.
Rebecca Longfall.
And first up this evening, the Bolton Conservation Commission will now continue the notice of the public hearing for the notice of intent filed for Century Mill Road, map 3.D, parcel 75, proposed construction of 3 single-family homes and the widening and paving of the existing gravel driveway. Rebecca, well, is somebody here representing the applicant?
Yes, there are 2 of us present. There's Matthew
Okay.
Watsky, I'm here as counsel, and there's Scott Hayes.
Great. And we also have our peer review engineer present as well, Brian.
Okay.
And just before we get into the first public hearing, I do want to remind participants that they can utilize the chat function, raise your hand, and please remain on mute until you have been addressed by the board chair. If you have not already, please change your display name to your first and last legal name, and participants will be addressed by the board, or I will get the board's attention towards the individual who has a comment or a question during that time of the public hearing. And then at that time, I'll request that they unmute themselves. So Brian, I'm not sure if you wanted to have our peer review engineer give an update on what they have found or discovered, because that's really the only update I have.
I was going to say, I think they would be the ideal person. I have a copy of the report in front of me, but if they could give us a quick update or overview as to what they found, I think that would be fantastic.
Okay, so Dominic, would you like to give a brief introduction?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Dominic Rinaldi with BSC Group. I don't know if you've had a chance to read our report. Oh, there it is. We were requested by the commission to review the 2 localized depressions in the back of these lots to determine if they qualify either as isolated land subject to flooding under the Wetlands Protection Act, or land subject to flooding or inundation by groundwater or surface water under the Bolton bylaw and regulations. In summary, so the calculations are for the 2 are very similar. There's slightly different things that you're looking at from the results to determine if it's ILSF or to abbreviate. I don't know if the commission has an abbreviation they like to use for the local requirement. I just called it LSF to shorten it. If that's okay with everybody, I'll stick with that. But what we looked at in the calculations, basically ILSF is, under the calculation, you look to determine if the depression is holding a 1/4 acre foot, which is, roughly 25%. I don't know, it's
Around 10,000.
10,000 cubic feet ish at a 6-inch depth. And the slight difference in the local requirement is the depression has to be at least 1,000 square feet in size, and under that calculation hold that same 6-inch depth. Our report kind of detailed the calculations themselves. but in both cases, we found that it did not meet the definition of either. Now, from photographs I've been provided and anecdotal evidence we've been provided, it's the results we got didn't quite jive. Not that these are definitely jurisdictional areas, but they certainly flood, right? They're certainly pond, I will say, rather than flood. From photographs we've been provided, and the calculations show almost no ponding whatsoever. So one of the things we included in our report, in the later stage of the report, is sort of detailing how we did the calculations, the information we used, and why we think that the results don't really jive with the photos and the anecdotal evidence we've been provided. I'll kind of walk you through those 3 steps sort of towards the end of the report. There's 3 main points of information that go into these calculations. One is the tributary area, so the area of land that drains to the depressions. For that, we used, in addition to the plan for the projects themselves and the underlying survey, we were able to get some LIDAR data from FEMA for the total surrounding area. That LIDAR data dates from 2010. We went back and looked at some aerial photographs between 2010 and now, and it doesn't look like anything that's happened there has significantly changed the topography, so that if these aren't exactly the drainage areas, they're pretty close. As you can see, neither drainage area is all that big, actually. The land is relatively flat. The depression kind of builds up to a slight ridge around it and then starts draining off in other directions. The second element, so we're very comfortable with the drainage areas. One of the second elements that goes into it is the sort of surface type. In this case, the land is wooded. Photographs have shown the woods are in pretty good condition. So what we used from the TR55 land descriptions of woods good. Again, very comfortable with using that and what it is. And then the third element comes down to what kind of soils you have there. So what is the hydrologic soil group, ranging from A to D, with A being your sandy, well-draining soils and D being your clays that just pond water like nobody's business. For that, we used NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, a division of the Department of Agriculture, online soil mapping plus test pits that were done for the septic systems in front of these properties. And what that information, which is showed, is an A soil, so a very well draining soil. I believe it's a sandy loam, off the top of my head, or a loamy sand rather. When you add that into these calculations, what we saw doesn't really surprise me. Small drainage area, woods, A soil. The issue really isn't the ability of those basins or those depressions to hold water. There's really no water getting there. The runoff ends up being very small, even for this 7-inch storm event that the calculations require. So what we did is we kind of looked at that, is how comfortable do we feel with the A soils and what matches out there. And if Rebecca, I don't know if you have control, if you can maybe scroll down to the soils map. There's a couple in there. Yeah, a little bit further. Sorry, thank you. Yeah, so right here, what you see is, basically what the different colors are different hydrologic soil groups. That sort of purplish in the back is the A soils. Kind of what we'll call the red in front of it is actually a D soil. So it's a very poorly draining soil. And then the green off to one side is what the NRCS calls an A/D. And basically, without getting too far down the rabbit hole of soils, what that means is in conditions where the soil is not saturated and groundwater is relatively deep, it's an A soil. It functions, it drains well. But in conditions where groundwater is more shallow and the soil becomes saturated, it actually will kind of function as a D soil and hold water up. The NRCS soil mapping are very good overall, all things considered, but they're not perfect. If you talk to the folks who do this mapping, it's based off a limited number of samples, a limited number of test pits, a lot of landforms, surficial geology maps, and other information. And it's not meant to be, you're standing in this particular soil type, that's definitely what you're going to find. It's much more generalized than that and a guide. So what you'll see in our conclusions is to really know, what I would suspect is if you dug a test pit in these two locations, these two depressions, you probably wouldn't find a perfect A soil. It might be that AD, it might be a D, it might be a B or a C. I mean, I don't know what it's going to be or how it's going to function, but that you're likely to see something that isn't a really good, well draining loamy sand or sandy loam or sand. And that's really why you see these depressions actually fill up with water. If the commission really wants to know 100% if these are jurisdictional areas, the only way to know that is to know the soils that are in these depressions. And that would that would basically involve half a day to a day of test pitting, a couple of holes, and some soil testing.
Thank you. Can you also, Dominic, just touch upon, I know there were some conditions that presented themselves that made it unreasonable to be going out on site?
Yeah, so unfortunately right now, obviously, as you know, from the time that we were contracted to do this work and before this point in getting your report, obviously, the snow on the ground kind of limited our ability to go out and really get a good feel for looking at the site, physically looking at the site. And certainly at this point, we're not contracted to actually do any soil testing on site, and obviously would need to involve the applicant and the landowner with anything like that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was a pretty good overview. Do members of the commission have questions for
I do have one.
regarding what we've gone through just tonight?
I do have one quick question that's sort of 7 inches of rain over a 24-hour period is how this is.
Yes.
That's the standard?
Yeah, that's the standard for both calculations. Like I said, the calculations themselves, both in the Wetlands Protection Act and the bylaw, are effectively the same.
Isn't that a lot of rain in a day?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. That sort of gave me a stumbling block when I was reading the report. That seemed like I can't remember a 7-inch rainfall.
It's a 100-year event.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I'm almost 100, but I haven't seen I don't recall that. It just seems like a lot to me, and I thought I'd voice that opinion. I don't know whether there's much you can do about it or not, but it just seemed like a lot of rain. If you're talking about 7 inches, maybe over 2 or 3 or 4 couple of days, it makes things a little different. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, so I just thought it was a lot. Anyway, you've answered my question, I think.
But
So
Jeff,
it's the standard that they use.
it's the standard that both use, and yes, as someone mentioned, I believe both regulations refer to it as a 100-year, 24-hour storm event, and then they define it. So rather than you pulling it off a map or different sources, they define it as 7 inches.
Do you recall a 7-inch 100-year storm event in Bolton recently? Not recently. I did, you know.
We have photos, Jeff, that were sent. This is a different project, but for this Still River Road project that we reviewed about a month ago, there was a storm event, and I don't quote me on this. It was in 2013, maybe.
That was 7 inches.
I'm just saying it was it qualified as a 100-year storm event. It wasn't. It was in the past 20 years, I believe. I remember seeing photos, but that was again on a different parcel, but same area.
I believe we've had 2 of them in the last 15 years, but again, don't quote me on that. I can't remember when those last ones were.
I don't want it to be literally. It just struck me as a lot of rainfall in a 24-hour period, and obviously it is. But I couldn't, since I've been living in Bolton, I can't remember that much rain falling all. Anyway, thank you. I appreciate the input. Thanks, Emily. Thanks to Brian.
I have a question about soils. I thought we had some information from last year when there was a wetland scientist who came out to look at those depressions. I thought that he had taken soil samples as part of his review.
No, so he was looking at the ability for those to qualify for a vernal pool
Okay.
at that time. And he may have done some augering while we were there, but it wasn't taken as a soil sample.
Okay.
I've got a
Dominic,
question.
that was Matt. I don't know if you talked to him at all during this.
Matt Byrne.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, other than the vernal pool question, no,
Right.
he didn't mention it knowing the soil types.
Yeah, I didn't think he did, but okay. Emily, I don't know if that addressed your question or not.
I sort of remember that time that we were just looking under leaves from salamanders and bugs
Yes.
and things like that would qualify it as a vernal pool. But
Yes. Yep.
Bill Payne, did you have a question?
Yeah, I've got a question also. Dominic, you were saying that the Bolton wetlands bylaw called for a 10,000 square foot ponding?
No, sorry, 1,000.
Yeah, it's 1,000. I want to be clear.
Yeah. So both of these depressions are physically big enough to qualify under the Bolton bylaw, but they don't. With the information that is currently available to us, the calculations don't show that 6 inches of ponding.
Yeah, so that's part of my question. So the depression B, the one that we did see ponding and had measured something like 850 square feet, which was pretty close to the 1,000 square feet, is only, one corner of that 26,000 square foot depression. So in looking at the topographical maps, the average depth of that depression B only varies by 3 inches, where the measurements that were made on site varied by up to 6 inches. So I was wondering if there's any way that you could get ponding over something as small as 1,000 square feet in those depressions without filling up those full depressions. So right now your calculations are putting water across a full 26,000 square foot depression and having that water leach into the soil, correct? Across that full surface area.
It doesn't actually, you don't include infiltration in these calculations.
So how do you lose the water that's on the surface?
It doesn't. There's just what you're seeing now isn't the loss of water through a well draining soil. You're seeing the lack of runoff. So when you have A soils and good woods, as weird as that seems for 7 inches of rain, you don't get on a relatively small drainage area, you get very little runoff. So, I mean, I believe we were seeing the total runoff for these is around, yeah, is 0.01 acre feet. So you're talking about 435 cubic feet.
So what's the definition of runoff? That means it actually has to flow downhill?
That's the actual amount of water that doesn't get, doesn't evapotranspire, it's the actual physical water that flows down to your point of concern, which
So
in this case would be the.
why would the soil type differ from clay versus sand then?
Well, so what the soil type does is it changes the curve, in the calculations is the curve number. So even though it's woods, the curve number for an A woods versus a B, C, or D, it goes up, becomes a larger number, and you see more runoff. And let me just stress, even depending upon what you actually find out there, these still might not be jurisdiction. You still might not have enough runoff to create that 6-inch ponding.
So what if you have pockets of land that are lower than allow for runoff at that point then?
I'm not sure what.
I mean, you're assuming that there's a steady decline in elevation, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically what we're assuming is if you look at this map, you can see the sort of heavy solid line around each depression is the drainage area. So that's the area where, based on the survey and the LiDAR data that we have, if rain lands on that in existing conditions, not proposed, so you sort of have to pretend that the proposed isn't there, will run down into each depression.
So water runs into that depression, and then from that depression, it runs off to the stream at some point? Is that what it is?
Well, from that, I mean, those depressions, unless physically what would happen to it in real life, I mean, in the calculations, nothing happens to it. In real life, it builds up enough to go over those berms, and I'm not really sure where it goes because I hadn't looked into that, or eventually it goes into the ground. I mean, no matter how bad your soils are, eventually water will go through.
But your calculation does not take into account that it does go into the ground then?
Correct.
It only runs
Yeah,
up.
the ILSF calculations in particular are very specific about not including infiltration in your calcs.
Hey, Dominic, I don't know if you could speak to this, but if we say that this is the way it should be, you said it's the way it is now with existing conditions. If you stuck a foundation for a 5,000 square foot house in there, that sort of dams up the way the water goes, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's gonna change the drainage patterns, whether it's the foundation or the grading that they do. I mean, we haven't been tasked with really looking into the stormwater management and what happens to the drainage.
Okay, that
post-development.
So it does. This is basically, if nothing changed on this land, this is what would happen.
Yeah,
what
we're
would happen
looking
if you
at
had 7 inches of rain tomorrow afternoon. This is what would happen.
Right. What we're looking at is whether or not these two depressions meet the definitions.
Got it. I got
it. As is. Right.
And apparently they don't, according to your report.
Based on the information available, they do not.
So you're saying in depression B, which is 2P or 2S there.
Yep.
If it rained for 7 inches in 24 hours, you would not get any ponding in any area that's 1,000 square feet.
You get a very small amount of ponding.
So how can we see such a different? And so you were talking earlier as to possibly soils. Why do we see such a different effect when we see a 2-inch rainfall? There's ponding
And that's what I was saying is the information provided by the commission and photographs obviously show ponding there. And when we do the calculations with an A soil, you just don't get that. And that's why we looked into what are the possible reasons for the difference between the calculations and what you're seeing physically in real life. And very comfortable with the drainage areas, very comfortable with the surface type. The third parameter really is, or the third variable really is the soils.
Right. Which is a guess right now.
I'm not gonna say it's a guess. It's based on the best information that we
Right.
have available to us.
That's a guess.
Well, no.
We-
So it's, for
But
instance, Jeff, a good parallel is if you look on the wetlands inventory mapper online, it shows you a lot, but it doesn't show you bylaw jurisdictional areas or everything on site. So that's why people go out and delineate specific areas.
Yes.
So
I-
that's the
and-
parallel, I think that's useful here, where there's a question about the soils. So what Dominic is suggesting is that's the only thing that had a little bit of, not really ambiguity, but would need to be narrowed down to give a 100% definitive answer about whether or not it's jurisdictional or whether or not it contributes to these calculations that he's provided.
So in other words, if A plus B plus C equals 10, but you don't know what C is, it could equal 12, right? I mean,
Sure.
somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
I mean, there's three
sure.
parts to this, and you know,
Right,
two,
yes, there's three parts to this and two of them were very comfortable. I mean,
right,
the
Right.
woods thing, I don't think there's any question on, if, no survey or LiDAR is 100% perfect, but they're good enough, these drainage areas, if they change, they're not gonna, to add the additional runoff you'd have to make these massively bigger and they're just not.
Right,
This
right,
is
but-
roughly how big they are.
But-
And so,
but putting a 10,000 square, I don't know how big the houses are on there, but putting a, 3,000 square foot house on there definitely changes something, right?
yeah, but again, that's not,
And that's a
what we're
different
just trying to
story. That's not a-
determine is whether these are jurisdictional under either the Wetlands Protection Act
I agree,
and
I
or
agree.
the local bylaw.
And they are the way it is, and your conclusions come to, based on the information you have, the way it is today,
Correct.
Yes.
right? I still think 7 inches
Suggesting
of
the
rain.
soil tests.
I still
Right,
think 7
right,
inches of rain is a lot of rain, but that's just me. Thank you, Dominic. I appreciate your,
No problem.
Dominic, one more question. Did you run
Sure.
your analysis using both soil types? Or only
Uh,
Right, yeah.
So just for fun, yes. Or not for fun, but just to see if it made a difference, yes. So I did only do A and D, right? There's two others in the middle there that I can't really comment on. And if it is a D soil, which is the worst, they had enough runoff and enough ponding to qualify under both the act and the bylaw. But again, that would be, a
That's-
D soil.
Okay,
Right.
so so there is a D soil close to those according to the map that we were looking at earlier, correct?
Yeah, and so if you can sort of scroll up just a tiny bit on this, Rebecca, the sort of I don't know, what do you want to call that? The dashed line there.
Yeah, the dashed line is
Is digitized off the NRCS soil map. So above the page, you can see the number and the HSGA. Below that is the D, and to the right of that is what I was talking about, where they qualify it as an A/D, and it really depends on this, the soil saturation and groundwater.
So for us to get a better understanding of the analysis versus what we're seeing in the field, you're suggesting we go in and do a soil, essentially a test of the soil?
Basically, it's a test pit.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a test pit. It's dig a hole and check the soil. I mean, it's not lab testing. It's not anything like that.
Right. You need to go look.
Right.
And can that be done, Dominic, when we have conditions like we have today or with snow on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, you bring in the right piece of, you might have to bring in a small excavator instead of a backhoe just to get out there and not have it get stuck. But yeah,
Thank you.
it's I would say that the only reason it's a slightly harder is, although if you can see the depression clearly enough, you can get in it and dig the hole in the right spot. Or you could always just, GPS it a little bit.
You can see it.
Yeah.
Those are pretty evident.
Yeah.
Okay, and so I mean, it basically sounds like that's probably a step we should take. Again, where the photos don't necessarily match with the calculations. It makes sense to do the soil testings now, especially as the neighbors have been interested, and they're the ones providing us with the photos. I would say we'd really need to wait until we kind of get that analysis done before we can figure out exactly whether these are isolated land subject to flooding under the act or under the bylaw.
Brian, to note, Dominic mentioned it briefly earlier, that work is not currently under his contracted, the contracted scope with BSC. So we would have to have that discussion and get authorization from or rather re-request it from the applicant, and they have the right to accept that and provide the funding for it, which I don't have a quote for it yet. But and then carry out the work, or they have the right to deny that and go to the Board of Selectmen with that denial. However, Dominic, how difficult or how quickly do you think you could turn around, or someone at BSC could turn around a estimate or a quote for that work that you're recommending?
Oh, I mean, that's by this week. I mean, the biggest part of it, to tell the truth, isn't our time. It's, the backhoe or the excavator.
Okay.
Is always the most expensive part of doing test pits, or doing a day of test pits.
Okay. I'm curious regarding turnaround to get a quote, get it to the applicant, and then, and I'm throwing it out there, I don't know if the commission's amendable to it, potentially having the applicant there and maybe having BSC just present as well. And then they can figure out the cost of the machinery outside of that. But my question is getting that number, whether we have you present or hire out.
Yeah, and the applicant is certainly capable of doing the test pit work themselves. I mean, they did do basically the same thing. It's just more on the front side of the houses for the septic systems already.
So Dominic, one more question. Where would you dig the pit?
Yeah, in each, you do two and do them, ballpark center of each depression.
Why would you do ballpark center and not like bottom left where the B is of depression B? So take your mouse down a little bit. I mean, why would you not measure it as close to that soil type D that's a little south of there, right? So do one in that corner and one right there.
Yeah, I mean, you could do it either way. It's center.
The pond, right? What we see is it's ponding in the bottom lower levels of those two depressions, right?
Yeah, you do it at the low point, which, as I said, so it's the bottom of the one on lot 2 as well. That's what you're saying. I was just going to say, because the topography just shows more of a flat bottom for that one than a stepped. But I mean, that's something you can figure out.
I mean, at that point,
at any point.
At that point, you're only 20 feet away from that boundary,
Right.
Do we definitely not have any soil data for the other lot? I'm just thinking that from a design standpoint, there should have been a test pit or something for foundation design.
Right. So
depression.
So what, at least I believe Dominic was referring to, and I don't want to speak for him, is that there was test pits done for the septics at the front of these
Right.
lots, not within the depressions.
Okay.
So the importance would be to get the soil type within the depression itself.
Right. I understand that. I'm just surprised that when they were maybe foundation, maybe we're just too early in the design process, but that soil tests weren't done where they're going to be designing foundations for that house.
I was gonna say, and do we know who did the test pits originally for the septic?
I'd have to go back and look. I don't know offhand. I mean,
I
the
don't-
applicant's here.
Yeah,
Go
but-
ahead, Hayes, could you comment on that by
Yeah,
any
I
chance?
did the test holes that we did.
Yeah.
So, if I just quickly, speak to that. The testing on lots 2 and 4 were just to the south, kind of west of the depression areas here. Well, you can't see where I'm pointing, but they're just south of or on the bottom part of the screen from where the dwellings are proposed. And those were performed by
Right.
those soils on those 2 lots were all sandy soils, and where we actually had observed groundwater data was on lot 2. We had estimated seasonal high water. I think it was like 308.5 to 309, which the depression on lot 2 is about 309.7 to 310. So it's very close to the surface based on the test data adjacent there. But also, the other lot, I can't remember what number it is, lot 1 or lot 4, the one.
I think that's lot 4.
The soils there were really representative of the D soils. I mean, I think that the NRCS line is pretty accurate. I tested both sides of that area, and there is a break in the soil conditions from a very well drained soils, sort of to the northeast. Then from the other side along the driveway coming in off Century Mill. I mean, water table was very high coming in off Century Mill. The soils were, kind of a typical damp, sandy loam glacial till. So, based on the data that we have, I wouldn't expect the soil conditions to change heading further toward the depressions to reach the break where the septic systems are proposed, and the depressions are further to the top of the page there.
Well, can I say that said, Scott, what do you think would suggest the difference between the calculations and the observations by the neighbors in their photographs? I mean, it seemed like soil condition was one of those things, one of the possible things that could explain it, and we should test that.
Yeah,
But you say you doubt those soils are going to change. So what do you think causes that difference between the calculations and actual reality?
well, it's interesting. I've given it quite a bit of thought. The watersheds aren't substantial to contribute enough water to fill these areas. The soils are well drained, as Dominic said. I think maybe it's the undulating nature of the bottoms of these. They're flat, but sort of there's little pockets here and there, and we are flirting with the estimated seasonal high water in the observed test pits adjacent. So there may be parts of the depression that have small groundwater contributions to them, and that might be kind of contributing. Some of the surface water is sort of a base flow, but I think it's pretty clear that from a drainage perspective, the areas and the soil conditions really don't support adequate runoff to qualify these. I think if you also based on the history of the site where these areas were essentially borrow pits for gravel, I mean, it's suggestive that the soil conditions exist there.
Wait, can I ask, when did you find the research? When were these borrow pits for gravel?
I don't know. They just appear.
But that's been proven for a fact. There's some evidence that, or is that just still people guessing that? I mean, it kind of looks that way to me, but everybody keeps talking like it's fact. I'd like to know where you got that fact.
I wouldn't call it a fact. I think
Okay,
it's just,
so let's stop stating it as such, please.
I'm sorry?
Well, everybody keeps mentioning these were, these look like take pits. They look like take pits. I'm like, maybe they are, maybe they're not, but until we know if they were or not, I don't know that I
Well,
can assume that they were.
I think by visual observation, soil was removed from these areas, whether it
Oh,
was.
sure, but when was that soil removed? 100 years ago, 2 years
Whether it was
ago,
gravel.
20
certain-
years ago, 50
Yeah,
years
right.
ago?
And whether it was gravel.
I'm just not sure. I just don't hear evidence of when exactly it happened, and were they definitely gravel pits? Was it removed for something else? I don't know.
Well, people generally don't take lousy soil, but anyway, I don't know for sure. I have no evidence to support it either way. I just say it suggests to me as a site professional that it was probably taken because it was good soil. But
Sure.
we have to verify with shallow test pits, in the area. But I expect that we'll find a soil there, well-drained sandy soil throughout, all the way to the property line. But at any rate, I guess that's all I have, unless you have a question for me further on that.
No, Scott, I was just, again, to what Brian was asking, you don't have any other reasons to see why these two depressions would pond at all then? I mean, we're trying to figure out why we're getting.
Yeah, no, I think,
really close to 1,000 square feet.
Yeah, I think that there may be a small, as I said, hydrologic contribution via differentiations in the water table. There might be small differentiations in the surface cover within the depressions that maybe allow water to pond there a little more readily. Aside from the topography draining it to one side, there may be small areas within the depression itself that aren't as well drained as the natural surrounding soil that hasn't been disturbed. So, it's curious, the evidence, it doesn't correlate well with, some of the observations we've seen.
Right, so the physical evidence doesn't correlate with the analysis at this point. And I think that's where the problem lies. That's where my problem lies anyways.
That's what I keep running. That's why I was curious to get this extra soil sample in, because that would seem to have one way to tie those two things together. If this was a D soil, or if there were certain areas of it that were more of an AD mix or a BA mix, it might explain it. But other than that, I'm just flummoxed right now.
Well, also localization of the high water table too. I mean, there may be
Right.
water tables higher, so that could be a contributing factor to some of this.
Scott, do you think it would be beneficial, and let me back up. Do you agree that what Dominic is suggesting regarding the soil test pit will 100% answer this question of that third piece that seems to not be matching what's actually happening out in the field, as we see once in a while occur? And on any site, is that typically you run through those three things as well? And when one thing you're maybe not 100% confident about, do you typically go out or suggest to your clients that, one piece is missing, so I'm going to conduct that, or maybe you should look at it? Is that typical, or is that unique to this circumstance?
Well, before you answer that, Scott, it's a question. I have a couple questions for him to focus on. Number one, what information does he have about the soils that are out there, and does he expect that if you go out and you do a test pit, is he going to find anything different from what he's expecting? And given the drainage calculations that have been done already, are they consistent with the regulatory standards set in the Wetlands Protection Act and in the Concom's bylaw? Because those calculations, whether you like the results or not, as I read both the Wetlands Protection Act regulations and the Concom regulations, are the definitive way to determine whether something is jurisdictional or not. And so where there's, under the DEP regulations, if there's a dispute about the maximum extent of the flooding that's been observed, the way to resolve the question of whether they're jurisdictional in order to do is to do the calculation. And here we've had BSC do the calculation, and its conclusion is that the average depth is 0.6 inches rather than 6 inches. So it's a tenth of the depth, average depth. And under the Conservation Commission rule and regulation, the boundary of an isolated land of flooding, or whatever your acronym is that you wish to use, is the maximum observed if it's during a 100-year storm, or the calculation that BSC has done. So here you have a calculation under both rules, both of which reach the conclusion that it's not deep enough to qualify under either of those rules, because both rules require an average depth of 6 inches. So I guess, so I'll just hand it off back to Scott. If test pits are done out there, do you expect to have anything found that's different from what you already know?
Yeah, I mean, it's very common practice to use NRCS soils overlay. I think with the soil test data that we have immediately adjacent to these areas, representing those A soils, sort of textbook. I don't think that we're going to find anything any different, but I don't think that data is really going to change the results of the calculations just based on the size of these watersheds. And I think it's important to note just, the large and level bottom areas of these things, they can impound a substantial amount of water without ponding to over 6 inches in average depth. So it should be very difficult to achieve that standard. I really think that.
I agree over the full 26,000 square feet, but not over 1,000 square feet. And that's what we're seeing.
Right. I also can, and maybe I'll focus my questions toward Dominic since he did the peer review. And I appreciate your comment, Scott, in that. Dominic, is it required to use NRCS data for this analysis?
It doesn't say. I mean, you use the best data that's available. If someone had done test pits in these areas already and that soil information was available, you'd use it because it was what was actually there. And barring that, as I think Scott just said, that the NRCS data is typically what you'd use.
And that's accepted common engineering practice, correct, Dominic?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to your stormwater calculations. You generally use the NRCS data unless there's something better, something more accurate, something that from the site.
Or if you see something on site that does not agree with the calculation.
If there's, yeah, and basically what we did was, because we did the calculations, like I said, and saw so little runoff and such little ponding, and I was given I don't know if I printed them out, it would be a stack of pictures showing ponding in these areas. We were really just looking to try and figure out as much for our own check of our own work, what was going on here.
If I could put up a question, may I ask the chairman if I could put up a question to Dominic, please?
Please, Ms. Watsky.
So, Dominic, as I understand the conclusion from your calculations, you have concluded that there are pretty sizable ponded areas in both of these locations. Is it like 8,000 square feet in one and 10,000 square feet in the other, or something on that order? The question is, how deep is the water on average? So from the photos that you've seen, I'm assuming you can't tell how deep the water is. All you see is ponded water, a puddle. I don't see, and help me understand this, as I don't see that the photos that you've been given are in any way inconsistent with the conclusions that you've reached, the calculations that you did.
Well, we have measured data from 12/3/2020 that shows in Depression B, with ponding up to 6 inches over 850 square feet. And that was 3 days after a 2-inch storm event. So where I'm going with this, it looks like somewhere around there, you could easily get to 1,000 square feet. And you would need, according to the analysis we saw earlier, it's 2/3 of the maximum depth. Your maximum depth at 6 inches right now. You're very close to that, 1,000 square feet, average 6 inches.
But that's not the way your regulation reads, that you determine whether something is
Totally
jurisdictional.
understand that. That's why I'm asking Dominic all these. I'm an engineer myself, and there's no way that I could design something on paper, go off and build it, and not have it work and still go off and sell it to a customer, right? If the measured data doesn't agree with the analysis, I have to question the analysis. And I'm questioning the analysis now because what we're seeing in the field does not match the analysis. So if there's a question as to if it's soil type or whatever it is, we've got to look into that. When we have an agreement between the two, then I'll be content.
I'm not following the conclusion that you're reaching, that if you found an area that had 6 inches of depth with 850 square feet of surface area, that's in any way inconsistent with Dominic's calculations. Because if you have the
You were just saying that.
if you have the square footage.
Okay, awesome. And how late are you guys open today?
Who's speaking?
Okay, thank you.
I think it's in the background.
I think it is.
The concern I have is I don't see that the distinction you're trying to draw is an indication that there's anything wrong with the calculations. If you have one small area. May I ask the chair to ask somebody to turn their microphone off?
Yeah, it might be Emily. I'm not sure if somebody has their mic on without realizing it.
Yeah, or is that something, does Rebecca have control over microphones? Can she shut the mic off?
Yep, so everyone's muted.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that. Thank you. If you want to continue.
That's all right. That's all right. I mean, it's an unusual experience to have us all meeting like this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'd be happy to have either Scott or Dominic weigh in on this, but as I understand it, it's not unusual to have one small area that might be 6 inches deep. But if you then run the calculations as it calls for in the regulations, and you determine that it's 10,000 square foot footprint and an average depth is only an inch, then it's non-jurisdictional, because the regs call for you to do that kind of a calculation. So it doesn't matter if you observed one little puddle that by itself during, I don't know, a frequent storm event, you have a puddle that's 6 inches, but then you do the calculations overall and you end up with an average depth that's so shallow, it's just non-jurisdictional. Then if it's non-jurisdictional, then if the area gets built in, gets filled, it doesn't matter. It just isn't something that's subject to jurisdiction. So it's
Understood. I believe what Bill, and Bill can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe what Bill is talking about is not just a small puddle. What he's talking about is that 1,000 square foot area that's required, that is within this larger area and therefore may qualify on its own within this greater area as jurisdictional. So that, and again, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that is what you are referring to.
That's correct. And that was after a 2-inch rainfall, a 24-hour 2-inch rainfall.
And that, how many days after, was that the calculation? We had a question about how many days after that it was actually measured?
Yeah, I believe it was measured 3 days after.
Okay, so I believe to add to Bill's comment, would it be possible that the measurement out there was actually at 7 inches before the third day here where the calculations were done? So all of that information, would measuring it out on site, doing the soil test, clarify those questions? Bill, would that be a good way to phrase your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Does anybody have an attempt at an answer for that one?
Yeah, I mean, I just
ahead.
wouldn't mind just chiming in quickly on that. You know, I think there's no question, you know, there's areas where there's depths that are, you know, 6 or 8 inches within these areas. The problem is with, you know, achieving the statute, once you exceed those deeper areas and start fanning this out over a much larger area, it's actually reducing the average depth. So, you know, you need to, you know, not look at necessarily maximum depth, but it's average depth throughout the ponded area. And as you fan out beyond these deeper puddled areas, it's going to actually reduce the average depth substantially because you're going to have a larger volume spread out over a much larger area. So
I know, Scott. So I quote from your report. It says average depth is calculated as 2/3 of maximum depth calculated. So we're not calculating a depth. Somebody actually measured a depth of 6 inches in this thing, right?
right.
If you're 2/3 of maximum and you need 6, you only need to be that maximum about 9 inches.
Right.
I mean, the measurements we have aren't 100% accurate. They were done probably by somebody sitting out there, you know, after a rain event with a ruler, and we don't know the actual average, but it's very close to, you know, being, you know, 1,000 square feet, 6-inch average, right? And what we're trying to figure out, or at least I'm trying to figure out, is what is the big difference between what the analysis is and what we're seeing in the field. Right. If there's something we can point to, let's take a look at it, because the two don't agree. And, you know, being an engineer, there's no way I can go off and design a new cell phone and go sell it to, you know, the public if it's not actually working. Right. In you know, the observed and the calculated are not aligning, and that's what's bothering me. I mean, that's why we were asking you earlier, what's the difference? But what are you seeing that could possibly be the difference? And you came up with a couple of, you know, possible reasons. But I mean, if one of them is, let's go look at the soil, let's take a quick look at the soils.
Okay. Are there any other current questions from commission members? Because I'm just running into time. All right. We talked a lot about asking for the an analysis of the soils to see if it is in fact a D-soil that is going back to those depression pits, which would kind of explain the difference in what we're seeing and what the calculations show. I can't speak for the commission, but I think I would be in favor of those samples. I think I'd like to poll the commission to see if they would be in favor of us recommending that analysis gets done. Any other commission members have thoughts, questions, issues? Do you feel that's where we're at this point? Is there a different tack anybody would like to take?
Are we going to open the public hearing to the public, Brian? First, it's okay if we wait until, but.
No, it's a really good point, and I'm sorry, I was just checking on time. We should absolutely do that. So if everybody wants to think about what I had just said for a second, are there members of the public here tonight that wanted to comment on this or that had feelings?
If I may, Mr. Berube, before you move on to the public, I wanted to
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead, Mr. Watsik, please.
Okay.
But please make it quick because again, I want to get public comments. We're going to need to vote and move on.
I'll be very quick.
Okay.
I'll be very quick. So in my view, you have the information that you need to go ahead and make a decision.
Okay.
And I would urge that the commission go ahead and make a decision.
Okay.
That this is non-jurisdictional. You have a plan in front of you right now that's designed so that even though in our view these areas are non-jurisdictional, Scott Hayes has designed the site so that there's compensatory storage being provided so that whatever water would be displaced from building in these areas would have compensatory storage provided for it elsewhere on the property. So your concerns about some impact from the work is already being addressed in these plans. And even that's even though it's, in our view, it's non-jurisdictional, and so there's no regulatory requirement to do that. I will just put this out there. I am concerned that if we have the further delay and the further expense, of going out and doing the test pits and coming back for another hearing, that when we come back, the plan will not have the compensatory storage anymore, because if it's determined that these areas are in fact non-jurisdictional, because of the additional time and the additional expense, my expectation is that the client will say, I'm not willing to offer that anymore. I want to have this closed now, and we'll provide the compensatory storage now, but not later.
Brian, may I just
Okay.
make a quick comment? So our local bylaw actually requires mitigation when resource areas, including the adjacent upland resource area, is disturbed. So you may very well still be required to provide mitigation, which your applicant, or your client rather, the commission's applicant, would or may suggest to be in the form of the compensatory flood storage that they have proposed at this time. So I think the commission is still, I think this is still a considerable project, and those compensatory flood storage areas may be very much related to any project moving forward.
Thank you, Rebecca. No, I appreciate that. The point I was going to make is as well, Mr. Watsky, too, is, you start off by saying that you think that I know everything I need to know to make a decision right now. And I guess what I would say to you is I think we were trying to be very clear during this that we have a mystery. We have an actual observed versus a calculation that aren't connecting or adding up. And I'm looking for a piece of information to help solve that riddle. So the fact that riddle has not been solved and it's open and people are just taking guesses, I do not have all the information I need to make a decision. I don't make decisions based on guesses, especially when we see, like I said, the calculations don't match the observables. So let's figure out the answer to that mystery and go forward from there. I don't have everything I need. And again, that's just one commission member. We will put it to a roll call vote. I think everybody heard what you had to say. But we're going to take comments from the public first, and then I think we're going to move. Like I said, I know why I'm voting the way I'm voting. I don't feel I know everything I need to know. But Rebecca, if you could, comments from the public?
Yep, we have Jim Garrity who has a question or comment.
Hi, sorry, I'm all set. You guys have answered my question, so I appreciate that. Thank you. It was, again, the calculations and the photographic evidence just simply don't match. And I'm equally confused as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then we have Richard, oh, where'd you go? Richard Davis.
Yes.
Oh, there he is, okay.
Dominic, after the 7-inch rain event, how deep would the water be?
On average, in one, it was about a half an inch, and in one, it was a tiny bit more than that.
Okay, so we're talking about amount of water that is less than an inch of ponding, less than an inch deep after a 7-inch rain event. Yet our anecdotal evidence, we had between 1 and 2 inches of rain in what was a season drought. I mean, it was extremely dry fall. And we have between 1 and 2 inches of rain, and the depth of the pools out there in roughly 800 square feet was 6 inches deep. I mean, according to your calculations, we shouldn't have any water out there with that little amount of rain.
That's right.
I mean, there should be none with that little amount of rain. You're saying less than an inch if we got 7 inches of rain. So that's a huge difference. Something just does not tally there in my reckoning. Another point is, have you seen the photographs of the extensive excavation that was done in these depressed areas a couple years ago without permission?
Have
You've
I
seen the raw soil photographs?
I've seen some photographs. I don't know if I've seen them all.
I'm talking about photographs where you're looking
Right.
at sand,
Yeah.
dirt, as if an excavator just left. Okay. I'm not talking about photographs that were taken a couple months ago with lots of plants growing up in the midst of it.
Rich, those photos were sent.
They were, okay. Because when we start talking about soil types and the idea that that soil, it's been moved around significantly. I just don't know what would that do? I mean, I'm hearing a lot of talk about type A soils, but were they type A soils before? Were they type D? And once again, we will never know that because we didn't have an opportunity to do any kind of testing before the excavation work was illegally done, might I add. Scott was talking about, different water table depths. Well, if they dug a test pit in front of that septic area, either of those septic areas, they're practically on the edge where the topography, falls off to the north. Well, we're going 50 feet away. I just find it hard to believe that there would be that much difference in water table moving 50 feet. Now, I'm not a hydrologist, but that does beg a question. And I do see that Scott Hayes has left the meeting, so I don't know whether this can be answered right now. I don't know whether it will ever be answered, but I would like to know if Scott Hayes is a financially interested party in this development. As we know, Scott Goddard is, and he did not disclose that he was a financially interested party in this project for approximately a year, maybe longer.
Richard, we appreciate that, but this is under a new filing and he has since disclosed for this filing, but I appreciate you noting that.
He has since
disclosed.
Okay. I guess I've said what I need to say at the moment then.
Thank you. Rebecca, was anybody else here for comment this evening?
I see no one.
Okay. All right, seeing no one, I would like to actually poll the commission. The affirmative that we recommend the requesting the additional soil sampling be done for map 3.D parcel 75 on Century Mill Road as discussed this evening. All those in favor say aye, starting with Bill Payne.
Aye.
Emily Winter.
Aye.
Jeff Bryant.
Aye.
And Rebecca, I'm an aye myself.
Okay, so you would like me to send a request to the applicant for the soil tests to be conducted?
Correct.
Okay. So what you would need to do is you did the roll call vote. So you would need to inquire whether or not a continuance will be requested so that I can then communicate that to the property owner and applicant and work with them to have that addressed.
Okay. Does the applicant or somebody representing the applicant empowered this evening to continue the meeting if they so desire?
I have the authority
Okay.
to agree to a continuance at the commission's request, yes.
Okay, and are you fine with us continuing until our next meeting?
Well, I'm not fine with it, but I can assent to the commission's continuance. I would like a clarification. I'm assuming that what you're looking for when you say you want to seek approval by the applicant for the testing is potentially for the applicant to arrange for the backhoe to come out. So I'm sure that's something that Scott Hayes can arrange. And question whether you want to have that coordinated with Dominic to be present at the time when the test pit is done.
Yes, and that I'm not going to speak for Dominic, but would that then if Scott's going to be the individual doing the work, therefore it's not under your scope, Dominic, is it under your current scope to come out? Does that fall under the site visit that was under the existing scope to oversee or to also be participating in that soil test?
Yeah, I think that, and I was going to talk to you about that, Rebecca, offline, but I
Okay,
think
and
that
we can
probably,
talk offline.
I think
but-
that probably does fall
Okay.
into there. And I was going to suggest that the thing that may make the most sense for the applicant is to hire an excavator directly. I mean, if they really want, I'll do it, but it probably makes the most sense for them to just do it directly.
So we can talk offline about that, but, and I apologize for putting you on the spot,
No,
but
no
my real
worries.
question was, do we need to draw up a new contract or not? And I apologize for not wording it that way. But so we will coordinate, and Matt, if you would like to, I'll send a follow-up email with the minutes as well, but the email will probably come first. And that just requests that that's what's conducted. And Dominic, do you just want to provide a very brief summary of that recommended work that you had previously stated, just so it's for the record? Just soil tests?
Oh, now or written? Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yes, just on-site soil testing in both depressions.
Okay.
Similar to what you would do for stormwater management.
Thank you.
Ask just for my own calendar, what is the date of the next commission meeting?
The next commission meeting is actually March 2nd.
Okay.
And do we have anything currently on for March 2nd? I think you might be first at 7.
So we do have one item, so
Okay.
I would say 7:15.
7:15. Okay. In that case, I'd like to make a motion that we continue the public hearing for Century Mill Road map 3.D parcel 75 until our next public meeting, Tuesday, March 2nd, 2021 at 7:15 p.m. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All those in favor, starting with Bill Payne,
Aye.
Emily Winter,
Aye.
Jeff Bryant,
Aye.
and Rebecca. I'm an aye as well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right, folks.
Dominic, I'll follow up with you tomorrow.
Very good.
Sure.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you,
Have a
Matt.
good night, everybody.
You as well.
Bye-bye.
Rebecca, is there an order that you would find easier to go in, or do you want to discuss 780 Main Street or 580 Main Street? I'm sorry.
Probably 580 Main Street, unless everyone has reviewed the minutes, then we can address that quickly.
I have reviewed the minutes. I did not see any changes. Other commission members, have people had a chance to review the minutes, or would you like a little more time with them?
I reviewed them, do not have any changes. or
I'm all
comments.
set with him, Brian.
Jeff, are you good? Bryant?
You know, I wasn't there for the meeting, but the minutes didn't seem to be anything unusual, but there was a lot of discussion going on in the minutes, and sorry I missed the meeting, but I wasn't there.
We missed you.
Yeah, I know.
All right. So all that said, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the minutes for our February 2nd, 2021 meeting as drafted and submitted at this evening's meeting. Do I hear a second for that?
Second.
All right. All those in favor, starting with Bill Payne,
Aye.
Emily Winter,
Aye.
Jeff Bryant,
Aye.
and Rebecca, I'm an aye as well.
Wonderful, thank you. So I will move on to our letter from 580 Main Street. So a little bit of background. We had a complaint, which I previously brought up briefly, where there had been some vegetation cut around one of the, it's an artificial wetland marsh area that was created with the property many, many years ago. This is 580 Main Street, which is also known as Bolton Office Park. So I went out, conducted a site visit, communicated with the property manager right away that this is an issue, cease and desist, and please let us know what is going on, and any future management needs to be approved by Concom within this area. And as a response, they did respond right away. They did provide some information on their thoughts. They thought that it was just regular maintenance of this area. I clarified that with them. We had a conference call with not only the property owner, but also the property manager and another representative as well. And I apologize, I do not recall his title. To talk through all of the order of conditions throughout the history of the property and what the concerns were with the work that was done. So this is their response letter that they then wrote after the meeting we had to the commission. And to clarify, the applicant that was before us is someone who may be representing a potentially new property owner and a new project later on, but they are in communications with the current property owner, and we're pushing them to hopefully get this resolved as well. And this is what we have received, what they're looking to do, because one of the issues is there was an open order of conditions that established the split rail fence as the limit of work, I will say, because beyond the split rail fence, there is a resource area, the artificial marsh or wetland that's shown on, I would call them historical plans because they're from a while ago, and I apologize, I do not recall the date off the top of my head. However, there was some confusion as to what the order of conditions was actually referring to that imposed these conditions that limited their ability to do work within this area. So I stated that what I had to go by was the order of conditions, and that which is associated with 112608, as you see here on the screen before you, and that it was still open. And until a new order or until they come back before the commission to change that or amend it, the way it is written, it includes not only as the proposed assisted living facility that was not constructed, but it also explicitly states that that order includes Bolton Office Park and associated infrastructure. So had that language not been in there, I think there would have been some ambiguity, but it's clear for me to read that document and say that 580 Main Street Bolton Office Park is included. Therefore, they would like to request a certificate of compliance, which I have not received all the documentation for yet, but they're just writing a letter to describe to the commission their steps to come into compliance and to work with the town in the future and moving forward to be sure that everyone's on the same understanding and that they would like to maintain certain areas because of the infrastructure that is there. And again, they're still under that expired order that had imposed conditions. They're going to be seeking the certificate of compliance. And at that time, the commission can discuss with them the conditions in perpetuity and the operation and maintenance plan that will stay with it. They did bring up that it is a basin, even though it has become an artificial wetland and marsh, and that the basin is used as a backup fire pond. But like we see throughout much of town, resource areas are used as backup fire ponds with the dry hydrant installed with them. but they just wanted to be sure that the commission is aware that at times it may need to be maintained. And so I forwarded this letter to you all, so I'm not going to read through it, but that is this lengthy summary of the conversations and therefore the results. So I did want to share this with the commission just to show that they are working to come into compliance and to address what they may be unclear on, and to come before the commission to ensure that moving forward, they're in compliance and there's no issues. Does anybody have any questions on that? Or does anybody have any questions you'd like me to share with them?
Not offhand. I mean, I'm happy that they're working to come towards compliance, and like you said, when they try to close out the OOC, I think we can work with them on any ongoing conditions or anything left in perpetuity that would kind of be workable for what they're trying to do there, I would imagine.
Isn't there a little brook that runs down past that property somewhere?
It's not a little brook.
I mean, I
Yeah.
don't mean a little, I mean, it's
Yeah, I
not,
know. I'm
it's
just-
not the river,
Sorry.
but it's a brook that runs down there somehow. I'm not sure, but and that feeds into that wetland area? Or it drains
The
it?
other way.
It drains it.
It drains it, yep.
Is there not an existing O&M plan for that property because order of conditions expired? Oh, Jesus.
So there is, Emily left. So the existing, to answer her question, the existing order of conditions is recorded with the property. So that's what we have on file with the property. The certificate of compliance would close that out, make it in perpetuity. So that is what I have to go off of, and that is what is in place currently. So yes, there's an operation maintenance plan. What it doesn't do is it does not really address what they're trying to do clearly. What it addresses is where the resource area is, how to maintain the parking area and areas that are obvious in needing very frequent maintenance, including the lawn area that's within floodplain and riverfront area, but not necessarily the area that's adjacent to the artificial wetland marsh. It's at least not explicitly identified as an area that's to be maintained. Even though it does have some weirs there for outflow structures. And as they stated in their letter, it is a fire pond as well. And I don't think the commission's expecting no maintenance, but there's oh, here comes Emily. There's a type of maintenance that is done around sensitive areas that was not carried out here, or it doesn't seem to be. Hi, Emily. You're there.
I'm on my phone now.
Hi, sorry. So
Okay.
I did explain or answer your question in a little bit of detail. So in summary, yes, there is an operation maintenance plan, but it doesn't directly reference what and how they were maintaining that artificial meadow and wetland area or fire pond, however you want to title that, but it describes all the other areas.
So they're going to update that and we will review that as a commission.
So that's potentially what it sounds as though, yes, they will be asking the commission that and inquiring if it's a minor change that can be added and therefore placed in perpetuity on the property. From my conversation with them, what they actually, I just got your text, I'm sorry. But what they actually bring forward to the commission, I don't know because I haven't seen it yet, aside from this letter. Any other?
So they actually have had a order of conditions been open since 2014? Is that what you, yeah, well,
There's a few, just like we're in now, extension of permits because of executive orders or circumstances that arose in society, to be general. I know that's not a professional way of saying that, but
well, I'm
leaving it at that.
that's fine, but it's way back from 2014. It's interesting.
Yep. Any other questions?
Not
Would you
offhand
like
on
me
this one, no.
to move on?
All right.
Just again, briefly, as I stated, I was advertising on the agenda. The Oaks Conservation Area will be reviewed and monitored, along with updating the marking of the property boundary and trail in March of 2021. Residents can contact the Conservation Office or Town Hall with questions. And then we can go to, it's gonna let me, the operation and maintenance plans. I did get comments from Emily, but no one else, and that's fine. It was a lot of information. But this is the gist of it for each of the properties. Oh, I found an edit I need to do already. Let me, one moment, bear with me. Okay, so these are very rough drafts, the first three. There are others that are more complete, so I apologize. So Bower Spring, as we go through, I already found an edit I need to do, but for each of the properties, we'll have our background section, monthly concerns related to jurisdiction, and delineations. I included the Boy Scout form letter and the notice of intent because typically in the past and where this O&M template was taken from, on town property, if there's infrastructure involved, we typically try to encourage volunteers or local Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or high school or college students to assist with that, as you all know. We'll have background section, past work, and then the operation maintenance objective, establishing a plan with defined roles and responsibilities and a schedule of work to enable the town of Bolton to consistently provide positive wayfinding experience for residents. I also think I'm going to add something about being a conservation property. I know one complaint we received recently, which is a constant pressure at Bowers, is the amount of activity and traffic the property sees, which we have addressed some of that with improving the parking area, although people are still on very busy days not observing that. It's better than it was, but it's still an issue. Additionally, the dogs on that property, at times we've had issues with dogs running onto adjacent properties. And also the most recent complaint is individuals not picking up after their dogs. So we can talk about that at a later time or address that as necessary. There are rules and regulations that the commission did approve, are posted to the kiosk. However, when you walk into the property, it's probably not what you want to look at when you're trying to take a break from everything going around you and just walk your dog. The timeline for work for this particular property, mowing is one of the largest maintenance items that we have on this property, along with invasive species management and just overall trail maintenance. The mowing occurs on Butternut as well as Bowers, and the restriction is that the mowing needs to begin prior to migratory birds nesting, and then stop mowing by mid-May to be within that time frame, and then mow again in fall. Or if we've missed that window, we mow once a year. And again, this isn't necessarily who we're contracting, but just what we do on the property and sort of the larger scale general way to approach it. It lists out the process for when a project is jurisdictional. Although we are the Conservation Commission, we do still need to file an order of conditions when it's jurisdictional. So the same DEP form or RDA. Where are we? Then again, discuss it at public hearing when it is jurisdictional, but we discuss our maintenance at public hearings, so that's a little redundant, but I think it's necessary to include in the document. So again, we're into June now, so in the middle of summer. This is related to trail maintenance, seeing as we can't be mowing during this time. Encouraging trail maintenance and communicating work with letters of intent if volunteers would like to participate in that work. That's my scrolling not working. Delineating areas. This is something that would need to be done if we want to isolate areas. And if we're not saying, I'm not saying we are using herbicides or pesticides or anything like that, but again, this is just for documentation purposes. We would set stakes and lines of areas where spraying for poison ivy would be approved and where mowing of brush is prohibited. Again, just delineating jurisdictional versus non-jurisdictional areas. And mowing, this can also be relative to volunteers, but also when we are out using the brush hog as well. Coming in August, reviewing areas that were set before mowing starts in the fall. Like I said, just following that cycle of migratory bird season, bird nesting. And then once again, before winter, we want to work with DPW for any clearing of the trail that they can provide assistance on, that they've been kind enough to do. And then parking areas, again, this can be relayed for volunteers as well. And then work related to sign painting or putting up new signage, which we should be okay with for a year. Any bridge repair work, any signage repair work, any trail resurfacing, that would be notified then. Again, we're in September now, October. And then before the budget season, we'd be seeking quotes for mowing fields. And then I've changed this, I'm sorry. And then issue notices to abutters. So much like we're doing now for the Oaks Conservation Area, I'll be mailing specifically to those abutters, but also advertising on the agenda and during our public meetings on any work that's being done. that's a larger project, or checking boundaries. And then inspecting infrastructure and suggesting repairs. Then of course we have the flooding precautions. These are pretty much the same across all the operation maintenance plans regarding muddy trails, and therefore decreasing any heavy work within those muddy areas, potentially reducing the amount of traffic that may be trying to avoid the muddy areas. And then proper conditions, just making sure that we're not designated any areas, as we talked about with the horse bridges, unless they are in fact installed for that particular user group, which I think going into the future, we should be reviewing those areas and the infrastructure we're installing to see how we can install infrastructure that supports other user groups or even known user groups. Again, including the section about the notice of intent and then the Boy Scout form letter. And that is basically it. So for each of the properties, they are pretty much the same. This again is more general, just looking at timeframes and scheduling to make sure that not only I'm getting out to these properties each year and cycling through this work, but also ensuring that when volunteers do want to assist with this work, as we greatly appreciate their time and efforts, I can point to them and say, we're at this time of year, this is what we're looking to do, and have a project ready, versus trying to sort through and find something for them to do, which is also fine, but it's more efficient to approach it this way, I think.
I did have a chance to read through them. I really just didn't have many changes. I noticed that in April is when they're due for us to re-up them, basically. Is it April of this year, right? Do we have them posted online anywhere on the town's website?
Not yet, because I wanted to get them as finalized as I could with you, and then make sure you're comfortable with how they're formatted. And then I was going to request that we share them if the commission's okay with it.
No, which is great. I like the format. I found it very easy to read and to follow through. I like the month by month breakdown, who is responsible for what, basically. Yeah, and I just, if we're going to vote on them in April, I'd love to give the public enough time to be able to say they were up if people want to look and see what we're proposing or what we're thinking.
Definitely. And then I also wanted to ask the commission, is there anything that I'm doing or we're doing that you want to see more of, or that we're not doing and we should be doing more of, or that maybe you've heard somewhere else they're making an effort in a specific area?
Wow, we could always be doing more, but
yeah.
We've actually been doing more in recent years than we had in the first few years that I was on the commission. As far as using interns, using our volunteers better, some of those cleanup parties, and again, now it's difficult in our lovely COVID hellscape, but having some of those invasive pulling parties, it was nice when we did the maintenance plan too, and I think you had add these in too, where we had with some of the DPW spraying areas, that we could also accomplish that with volunteers and hand pulling. Yeah. I'd love to see those work parties. I just know it's very difficult for us to really start addressing those in the short term.
We did do one, Brian, and it was relatively small. We did limit the number of people, but we got quite a bit done. So we are figuring out ways and places that we are able to socially distance and get individuals out there. Unfortunately, it does deter some people because you do have to pre-register and there's sort of a upfront process. But I think people are getting more comfortable, or maybe unfortunately used to having to approach projects or events that way. So it may be easier now that we're sort of going into the second year. I'm hating to say that, but
Yeah, I know. It strikes me sometimes too that I know a lot of kids at the high school are required to have a volunteering or community service hours that they need to get in. And I'm wondering if we could find the right person to work with to try to coordinate one of those things. If we do an invasive clearing day or a weeding day or some sort of maintenance day, some way to get the word out at the high school, hey, if you're looking for service hours and you need them, on such and such a date, we're organizing a bunch of kids from the high school to go to Bowers or go to one of these, areas and yank invasives or poison ivy for a few hours. But again, this is a lot of this is post-COVID.
yeah, I think that is doable too, though, even if we separate it into a couple days and limit the numbers again so that people can still go with their friends socially distanced.
Yep.
It may be possible. We actually did just get a contact with the high school from our MVP action grant process. It sort of came out of the woodwork, which was nice, because we had been having difficulty with contacts before with the high school, but so I can definitely reach out to her and see if we can get something, a regular event scheduled or opportunity scheduled with them.
Speaking of social distancing, just a note, are they planning on doing anything with the camp this year?
Yep.
Same sort of.
Yep. So the commission, as you may recall, did approve their activities earlier this fall, late summer. And they actually, I'll be posting their flyer for them in the kiosk as we typically do every year. And it will be the same policies. And if something changes, then I'll be updated, but still socially distanced, wearing masks. But yep, they'll still be holding the camp.
Fun. And now that we're in year 2, Brian, you gonna grow your beard back?
Yeah, imagine if I kept it for the duration. My wife would have left me by now. You can see my eyes would be just covered. Yeah. We'll get there. I think I mentioned it last time. I'm curious to see, or I think I mentioned it with advisory maybe. But I'm curious to see the usage of our conservation areas once we get into kind of a post-COVID experience. I'm curious how much of that goes away. I have a feeling a lot of that increased usage is here to stay as more people have experienced some of our conservation areas and are now used to taking their dogs for a walk or just getting themselves out there. So that would be interesting to track going forward, Rebecca, of course, with our huge resources is, just to see the person who sent the letter about Bowers Spring had made a good point too about our conservation efforts that, as Bowers gets used more and more and more and more, we might have to start looking at areas where we, take part of it offline or ask people to stop using certain areas for a time like that. That general conservation may start to become a problem in some of those well-traveled areas. And it's just something to keep an eye on. Again, I don't know what we have for resources now to tackle that. But it's something that may change going forward, just usage rates.
Yeah, and that's something across Massachusetts from my contacts and my counterparts and other organizations and towns are interested to find out as well as, is this here to stay, is it not? We agree, or we seem to agree that it's going to stay increased. We just don't know how much. And I think what really plays into it is not only that people may have discovered it for the first time, but also the remote working or the remote schooling and potentially having the opportunity to take a lunch break or coffee break or snack, whatever it is, you're going out and visiting the property or a property instead of having to drive having to stay at work or having to stay focused on what you're doing. But we'll see. I will talk to my counterparts and see if someone's come up with a great idea for that. And if not, I will brainstorm and see what we can do. But I may actually reach out to that individual who raised a concern and see if they would be interested in just, if they're a frequent visitor of the property, to just say, you know, this is how many cars are there. I cross paths with this many people today. Because that honestly may be our best way of tracking it. If you have one person carrying out the same observations, it's a little bit less of a variable to deal with, but it's a good issue to have, but not at the same time.
Not bad.
Yeah.
All right. Other comments from commission members on the progress of the operation and maintenance plans?
I guess I'm just gonna say for the whole commission to hear, my two of my comments were in regard to invasive plant management. And I don't know how specific we want to be, but I do know there are certain species of invasive plants on different parts or different conservation properties. And if we wanted to address those on a property by property basis and establish, I guess, kind of priority methods, I suppose, and maybe looking at the fact that spraying should be a last resort. And if we can, in our operation maintenance plan, think about other ways that we can deal with those plants prior to you going, to the worst case scenario of spraying. So that was just kind of my thought. And I think poison ivy was listed, and I understand that we're at a rough draft step here. But maybe kind of talking about, okay, this property, we have bittersweet, we have, what's the multiflora rose, and this is how we would address this, and kind of case by case and specific management of those things. And I know that there's just a general O&M plan kind of floating around with Parks and Rec, and I know Bolton Local has been looking at it just for Parks and Rec properties. And there's already a conversation going on about how it would be nice, even with DPW, to reduce the amount of spraying that happens with invasive plants. So that was kind of my whole thought about, as we're looking at each of these conservation properties, how can we better address the invasive plant growth that's occurring on each property, and what is that growth, and how should we deal with each individual type, which would be a copy and paste eventually, because we're going to have the same, we're going to have repeat plants, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But just, that was kind of my thought. How detailed do we want to get, I guess? And so.
I think that's a really good point, Emily, and that can be easily added, I think, because I already know, at least on a handful of properties, what the major, or what you frequently see when you're walking around. And that's easily addressed or assigned to a volunteer that may be interested in focusing on one property or one area, or myself when I go out and then just focusing on that area, or workday or high school group. And also that lines up with our AmeriCorps member who's working right now to provide outreach on the invasive species. So on the town website, actually, there is a breakdown of identification information for sort of the more common that we see on our properties, and then a best management practice. And they're hoping to make guidelines on those best management practices in one form versus the multiple sections. But I think that's something that I can just pull from those as well. So it's just sorting through those, but I think that's a really great idea.
What what do we do? Say you do cut and or pull day of tackling one specific, call it, let's say bittersweet. You pulled a ton of bittersweet. What do you do with that? I mean, if it's on the, what do you do with the actual bittersweet that you pull out? Do we do small brush fires on the property? Do we take it off site? How does that get handled?
So we take it off-site to compost, but what we do is we bag it first.
Got it.
So compost isn't the right word, I'm sorry. We bag it so that it essentially burns and dies in a black bag. And then it's no longer an issue. Some invasive species, if you pull it up, and just compost it and turn over brush piles like you see at Bowers so that it doesn't allow it to establish a root system again, that's sufficient. But others like knotweed, for example, which we don't have too much on our conservation properties, depending on what property you're talking about. I'm not going to jinx us. That would be one where you'd want to burn it. Or the best management practice right now that they're still researching is to cut and treat it, but treating the stem so it's very direct. Anyway, though, the commission did last year authorize that we could apply for a burn permit to burn the larger piles or smaller segments of it, but it was too late in the year at that point. So if we get another good snow and we set it up right, the only issue is right now where the piles are, they're at the edge of the fields where you would want them in the middle of the fields to burn. And we need quite a substantial piece of equipment to move it, which isn't to say we can't do it, but it's a little bit more of an effort than just lighting the pile on fire just because of the size of it.
Other initial questions, or any members of the public here what would like to comment on our operation and maintenance plans? Any members of the public still with us?
No.
Lost them all already. All right. Anything we haven't covered yet this evening?
I don't believe so.
Right. Any other new business?
I don't believe so, unless you have something I don't.
I do not.
Okay.
Funny story.
Are we voting on that 40B letter tonight or not?
So I thought we already voted on it,
Okay.
and you were just reviewing the draft of the letter. So that's actually a good point. I didn't get back any comments on the letter, so I can resend it, but if everyone's comfortable with that, I can send that out. But so
I was
I'll
fine with the last
resend it
draft.
tomorrow and
Okay.
just email me back, issues, no issue, that sort of a quick thing, just so that I have it on record, and then we will send it away.
Thank you for pulling that together. It was very well written.
No problem. It was a mix of different things, so.
It touched on several different topics, which was great. It kind of encompassed all of the issues that exist. So
I'm glad you liked it. Thank you.
All right. Anything else this evening? Not hearing anything. I'd like to make a motion that we hereby adjourn the Tuesday, February 17th meeting of the 2021 mission of the Bolton Conservation Commission. Do I hear a second for closing?
Second.
All right. All those in favor, starting with Bill Payne. Did we lose Bill?
he's still on. He's muted.
Still there. He's thinking about it. He wants the meeting to continue.
Bill.
So I'll pass Bill for now, let him think about his vote. Emily Winter,
Aye.
Jeff Bryant,
Aye.
Rebecca, I am an aye as well. In
Okay,
which
well,
case,
we have three, so,
I think we can close by majority then,
yeah.
but not unanimous because Bill wants to keep it going, which
Hey, do you got me now?
Oh, yeah.
I'm an aye.
How do you plea on us adjourning this evening's meeting, yay or nay?
I'm an aye, yay.
All right, so then it is
Thanks, Bill.
unanimous. And we'll
Okay.
see everybody in 2 weeks, if not before then.
Great.
All right, take care, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Good night,
Night.
folks.
Bye.